Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about just some basic beef cattle, cow-calf production thoughts. So if you're, maybe thinking about going into the cow-calf production, beef cattle production, just wanted to give you just some of the basic essentials that will be necessary and some things to think about before you step over there and actually buy some cows. And so some things that we got to think about first is basic fencing requirements for cattle. For a simple basic cow-calf operation, most producers can get away with just a single pasture. However, it does begin with one pasture. It begins to limit your grazing strategies and the ability to rotate cattle to help better manage forage conditions. And so again, one good pasture with perimeter fence is kind of the basic need, but as you begin to split those pastures some, you can start to manage them a little better. For cows and cattle, typically just a 5 or 6 strand barbed wire will be adequate. Some producers opt for a net wire, which is closer spacing, and especially on perimeter fences or maybe areas that you may be weaning cattle because they kind of keep cattle from pushing their head through the fence. But with a 6-wire barbed wire fence, most of the time that's going to be plenty adequate. We always recommend your perimeter fences be in really good shape to keep those cattle contained in your operation, so you don't lose them for obvious reasons. But if you're on a pasture or a county, if you're on a farm to market road or a county road or even a major highway, perimeter fences are so critical for that, because we don't want those cattle to get out and maybe stray into the roadway and get killed themselves or cause a traffic accident that could harm somebody. So basic fencing requirements is important. Again, single pasture, that's all you need, but as you split those pastures up, you have the ability to more efficiently manage those cattle. So fencing, that's kind of a basic thing you need to think about before you get the cattle. Something else you got to think about is the basic needs of the cattle. And for cattle in general, it's nice to have some shade and shade trees for those cattle. It's not mandatory. If I'm raising cattle that have a lot of hair and that are more adapted to, let's just say, Montana, some English or continental based cattle, and I'm trying to raise them in South Texas, I probably better have some shade for those cattle, whether it be trees or some kind of artificial shade. If I've got predominantly Brahman influence or Bos indicus cattle, I can get away with that. But certainly during some of those inclement times, it's not a bad idea to have some shade trees if it is available. But again, depending on your breed type of cattle, you may not need it. Extreme weather conditions in Texas, we don't typically have the extreme cold conditions that would warrant having a calving facility where we bring cattle in to calve them. Occasionally we do get some inclement weather and we can get into the 20s and maybe some ice and snow. And if you're trying to calve during that time of year and you have some heavy tropically adapted genetics, Brahman type genetics, those calves may need to be warmed up. So you may think about when you're calving around that, and we've talked about calving seasons and when to calve and other discussions. So again, those are some basic requirements. One of the most important things that we've got to think about is our water resource. In Texas, we do rely heavily on ponds and streams for our water resources, and then we also can depend on water that comes from well or a public water system in the form of water troughs. A good source of clean water is a basic necessity for cattle, that you've got to have that. And clean water, is extremely important, and that's going to help with the production. But then also, if we get into some issues where we've got some stagnant water, we can get into some toxicity issues. So you have to be aware of those types of things. If you're going to put in a water trough or source of water that is dependent on you making sure that there's a constant supply every day, so rather than having you know, a 1 to 2 acre lake that's got plenty of water every day, you don't have to worry about it. If you're going to depend on a trough-based system, you've got to make sure that you probably check on those cattle to make sure that they've got water daily. Or if you're not checking them daily, you make sure you've got an adequate supply of water to meet the need of those cattle in between the time from when you check them the first time to when you come back. And that's important maybe during the winter time, but it's extremely important as we move into the summer months, because the water requirements for a cow can range anywhere from cooler, wetter conditions where we've got the grass has got a lot of moisture in it. A cow may only need 10 gallons of water today. As we get into the summer, the grasses are dry, it's 95 to 100 degrees. We could be looking at a cow drinking 20 to 30 plus gallons of water a day to maintain what her body needs. And so what you need to do is think about that. If I'm going to be checking my cows daily, I've got 10 gallons, and I've got, you know, and during the summertime they're drinking 30 gallons of water a day. I probably need to make sure I've got a 300-gallon water source. But if I'm only checking those cows twice a week, I'm going to have to multiply that times 3.5 times. So I've got to think about those things, because without water during extremely hot and dry periods, cattle can die fairly quickly, and we have seen that in the past, and that's not a good scenario. That's not a good welfare practice. So think about the water requirements. Also, calves. Nursing a cow will have a water consumption factor as well. Wean calves, 400 to 500 pounds, may drink anywhere from 10 to 20 gallons of water per day. So water requirements, and there's a lot of good resources on the web that talk about the requirements of water for cattle during different types of the year. So water is a basic fundamental need that we've got to think about as well. The stocking rates, so how many cows that you can run on your particular operation, the rate of that, are some things that you've got to consider as well. We always recommend that you stock a little bit more conservative, and I especially recommend if you don't have a historical perspective on a particular ranch. And so if you just bought a piece of property and it's 50 acres and you're in the eastern portion of Texas, but I don't really know how many cows the previous owner managed on that particular operation. I'm probably going to start a little more conservative until I get a feeling of what that particular operation will produce for me. So again, we typically think about maybe starting out, and that's 75% of what you think the stocking rate will be. And maybe you maintain that, and then you can fluctuate from there. The other thing is, when you're thinking about stocking rate, is figure out actually how much grass you have. You've got to take out your house, barn structures, or areas that are fenced off where cattle cannot get to, ponds, wooded areas that are not going to have any grass under them. And so actually calculate what your actual pasture area is, and use that to calculate how many cows that I can graze on that particular piece of land. We've talked about in other segments of some tools that you can use that are available on the internet that'll help you go in and calculate that grazable acres that you do have, so you can better calculate a stocking rate. But again, we always recommend maybe starting out a little conservative or work off of somebody else's estimates if you have them from a previous landowner. So stocking rate. The other thing that you've got to be real careful with stocking rate, depending on what county you live in, as well as what area of the state, many of you should be or will be concerned about ag valuation on your property. And so fortunately in Texas, we have the ability to value rural ag-related property based on a different rate. And so when we do that, we drastically reduce our taxes to pennies on the dollar for that property that is in agricultural production or maybe wildlife exemption as well. And so with that's important to consider. And agriculture production from a cow-calf operation could be grazing, cattle, but it also can be hay production. One of the things that I would recommend is you touch base with your local appraisal office. And you have to go to your local appraisal office, your local county appraisal office, to get this information, because county to county is going to be a little bit different. And what your county is may be different than what the next county is. And figure out what those requirements are as far as the number of cattle that should be on a particular piece of property. Sometimes those are negotiable, and sometimes we do work with those county appraisers to give them a better understanding of what a more acceptable stocking rate is going to be. And so those are some things to consider when you're thinking about your stocking rates, whether it be on cattle or small ruminants or something like that. So be sure to check with your local when you purchase a piece of property or you're starting a cattle production. Check with your appraisal office. They're going to help you get signed up for that ag exemption as well. So they're a great resource, good place to start, rather to head that off early as you begin to think about putting that ranch together. So you've got some cows, and maybe you purchase those cows bred, maybe you purchase some heifers. You know, the next step is, okay, so once they have calves or they're getting to the age where I can breed them, we need to either think about artificial insemination, or we put a bull on those cattle. So reproduction is important, and it doesn't work unless we do have conception there. So what are my options? You know, I've got 15 cows. Is a bull my best option, or is artificial insemination my best option? Artificial insemination eliminates the need for the bull, but with artificial insemination, you're going to have some costs associated with that. The cost of synchronizing those cows, those heifers or cows together so that you can breed them at one time. So there's cost associated with that. It can be around $20 a head, not including labor. Then you've got the semen costs that are somewhere in that $20. Then you may have a technician fee if you've got to pay somebody to do it. And then just the logistics behind it. So with artificial insemination, you're going to have to run them through the chute a couple of times as well. So there is that aspect. The other aspect is with artificial insemination, you know, you can expect maybe first service conception rates in that 60 to maybe 80%, or some figures, depending on the quality of the technician, how the cattle are set up, and so on. But the reality is, unless you continue to breed those that don't come in or that don't get settled with AI, you extend your breeding season, you're going to end up having to figure out a way. Either I'm going to have open cattle, or I'm still going to have to clean them up with the bulls. So really and truly, artificial insemination is not going to eliminate the need for a bull. It will, you know, you can introduce some higher quality genetics at a more economical price possibly. So bull. So if I'm just going to decide, well, I'm going to have a bull. Well, typical bull, mature bull to cow ratios are about a bull to around 25 to 30 cows is typically what we think of. If it's a young bull, maybe a 15 to 17 month old bull, a common rule of thumb would be one cow one bull per, so if that bull is 15 months old, we would expect that he could service about 15 cows. 16, 17 months, about 17 cows. Upwards to a mature bull is around 25 cows that he could cover per year. So that gives you some rule of thumb on bulls. We do recommend a bull's not guaranteed as long as he's out there with the cows. So we recommend you do a fertility exam before he's turned out for the first time. And then we recommend following up, have your local large animal veterinarian conduct a breeding soundness exam, fertility exam on that bull annually to make sure that there's not any reproductive problems, because always remember, a cow that doesn't get bred, doesn't have a calf, doesn't give you a paycheck the next year. Okay, so I've got my fences put together, I've got a water resource, I've got my forages established, you know, I can meet the needs, basic needs of the cattle. I know how many cattle that I can run on my operation. So now the next question is, well, what breed or breed type of cattle that I choose, and that can be a challenge. There's a lot of there's over 100 breeds of cattle in the United States today. There's probably about 15 to 20 major breeds in the U.S. today, and really we can divide those into three functional groups. Okay, and those three groups would be our British breeds, which would be example would be Angus, Hereford, Shorthorn, Polled Hereford, and Red Angus. Those breeds are very maternal, so they're good milking ability. They easy fleshing ability, meaning they will put on condition and fat. So that makes them an ideal candidate for a cow that's very efficient on the ranch. They also are known for their easy fleshing or easy fattening. They also are higher marbling, so their meat quality. The downside of those breeds, they're more adapted to cooler environments. And so in the tropically adapted environments, they're not as efficient. The next breed group that we have would be our continental breeds, and we brought those to the United States mainly to increase the performance of our cattle that were here already, our British breeds. And so those cattle are known for their growth, their muscling ability, and their leanness. And so we really like those cattle from a yielding perspective and growth and performance. If they're leaner, higher yielding, heavier muscle, they don't fatten as well, or don't eat fleshing up as well. So maybe in a purebred standpoint, they may not be as suitable to some of our cow conditions. They also, on average, are lower marbling. And again, we're working off of averages here. We know within breeds there can be some differences there. And then our last breed group would be our American breeds, or our Brahman influence, our tropically adapted type breeds. These breeds are suited to the more hot environments of the southern portion of the U.S. And these cattle are known for their adaptability to these environmental conditions with parasites and heat and maybe lower quality forage and stressors. At the same time, they're very good maternal ability and they make really good cows. However, on average, those breed types are known to be a little bit lower in marbling. Again, that's on average. There's differences within the breeds, and there are some cattle genetics within those breeds that are higher marbling, and a lot of those breeds have made improvements. So those are our three breeds. Now, what we always say is you match the cow to the environment. So figure out what breed works well in the environmental conditions you're in. If you're in Texas, for the most part, you will see that a lot of our cattle on our commercial cow-calf production, the cow is going to have some Brahman influence in it because of the adaptability, but also the heterosis or hybrid vigor, or when you crossbreed animals, you get that improvement in reproductive efficiency, longevity, and just in performance. So we'll see a lot of our cattle with some Brahman influence. Not to say that I couldn't raise straight English or British breeds, Angus or Hereford or Shorthorns, down on the coast. It's just whenever you move cattle that are not as adapted to their environment to into those areas, production costs are going to go up. Okay, so when you adapt cattle to where they're suited, then you're going to have, you'll be able to control the cost, and they're just going to be more productive for you. The other thing is, then you've got to figure out, okay, I've got my cow base, well, what breed of bull do I put on them to complement her genetics to produce a calf for my market? Now, what is your market? Now, is your market taking them to the local livestock auction? If it is, figure out what cattle are consistently right there in the market that'll produce calves that are productive in your environment, but also will give you a good price as well. You also have to, your market could be directly to a feed yard. Maybe you've got a niche market, and maybe you're going to finish out cattle on your ranch, either with grain or grass, and sell them directly to a consumer at a farmer's market. You've got to figure those markets out and then tailor your breeding system to do that.